Juneteenth has gotten weak. They have allowed the rainbow gangers to come and dominate it. They've integrated it. They've had immigrants all involved in it. Juneteenth is about the celebration of the emancipation of the American Africans. It is not about the celebration of rainbow culture. You never hear Chinese say, I'm Chinese descendant, or I'm a Chinese descendant. You don't hear them say, I'm Arab descendant, or I'm Arab descendant. No, they say, I'm Chinese. But with black people, we will say Afro-descendant, African descendant, because we're still trying to separate ourselves from the continent. In black men, it's the same thing. Why are you crying about DEI when you got all these non-black women you're married to, having babies with, living off of you? There's no DEI in your household, because if you try to leave that white woman, she's going to take you for every penny that you got. So you're crying about Donald Trump cuts. Why don't you cry about your own behavior? Our biggest issue, Baba David, is we don't want to take accountability for the role we play in our own oppression.
I see you over there, Patrick, with your Eagles gear on. You know, I'm going to talk about that later on, but we want to welcome to the show Dr. Umar Johnson. How you doing today, Doc?
Peace and Pan-Africanism. Happy New Year. Good Garvey Day.
That's right. You know, we ain't talked to you since last year, and we look forward to talking to you every year, any day of the year. So, well, listen, we were looking forward to talking to you last Sunday, the first Sunday of the month, but you were catching a flight. Were you out of the country, out of town? What were you doing then?
Let me think. I was in Ghana receiving my Ghanaian citizenship the first week of January.
There you go. What? That's what I don't see. And you know what? I sent you that. I sent a post on Facebook with a picture of you in the audience with your proclamation in Ghana. And a picture with me and Patrick on there, letting the people know that you were going to be on the show today. And I chose that picture because I think it's very significant that, you have received your dual citizenship. You are now a citizen of Ghana as well as a citizen of America. So how does that make you feel?
Well, I actually have ancestry in Ghana. Most American Africans, depending on how recent or how ancient the trafficking of your ancestors out of Africa, the forced trafficking of your ancestors out of Africa took place. So the research, according to the research, most Africans in the diaspora have about 7 different African kingdoms represented in their DNA, on average, 7. If your ancestors were stolen from the continent towards the end of the transatlantic slave trade, you may only have 1 or 2 kingdoms represented in your DNA. Some people have as many as 14 because their ancestors were some of the first taken. And, they took us to the Caribbean. They mixed us with other Africans from other kingdoms.
That's right.
So some of us have 14 to 21. Some of us only have 1 or 2. On my father's side, we have 7. And one of those countries from which we were taken was Ghana.
And I was going to say that, because you mentioned about 7 and sometimes even 14 separations, is because of the migration. We migrated from here to there, and we picked up some seeds as we went along.
Absolutely. You got to realize, with every generation, there's normally the assumption that a child will be born. So grandma may have married a Ghanaian, and then the granddaughter may have married a Nigerian, and then the grandson may have married a Gambian, and that's how you get them. Whether it's through, the breeding farms or whether it's just through our own voluntary choice to marry someone on the plantation, that's how you get all those bloodlines in, because slavery was about 20 generations long, 400 years. So you're looking at the possibility of 20 different bloodlines entering into your DNA.
Well, I say it's only like 20 generations long, because I remember seeing you doing an interview, and you were saying that your bloodline goes back 20 generations to slavery.
Yes, indeed. We can trace back to 1701. My 6 times great-grandmother, Betsy Bailey, who is Frederick Douglass's grandmother. This is the woman who raised Frederick Douglass alongside his cousin, Stephen Henry Bailey, who is my 4 times great-grandfather. Yes, my 4 times great-grandfather. My grandfather, Stephen, his mother was young Betsy, named after the matriarch. So Frederick's mother, Harriet, Okay, she was raped by the slave master, and so was Stephen's mother, young Betsy. So those are my direct descendants. The difference between Frederick and Stephen, interestingly, they were raised together. Frederick went to the big house to begin his life as an enslaved African a year before Grandpop Stephen, because he was a year older. Frederick was born 1818. Grandpop Stephen was born 1819. Now, Frederick Douglass, for those who know the story, he was sent to Baltimore to be enslaved after the master died. As you know, on the plantation, they redivided the property, and we were considered property, not people.
That's
so
right.
Frederick was sent to Baltimore, but my grandfather Stephen remained with Grandma Betsy. He was with her, I believe, until she died.
Mm-hmm.
So Frederick wasn't around when she died because he was in Baltimore County, but my grandpa Stephen was still with our grandmother Betsy up until she died. Whether he was at her bedside, we don't know, but he would have still been with her longer than Frederick because, again, Frederick went to Baltimore. And then, of course, he ran away. Grandpop Stephen, I don't see any record of him having ever escaped. He did participate in the Civil War with the 19th Regiment of U.S. Colored Troops of Maryland, and his son, my 3 times great-grandfather, George Washington Bailey, who's the first black public school teacher in Denton, Maryland, he served in the 9th Regiment U.S. Colored Troops. So I'm assuming that the slave master, as they often did during the Civil War, they would send their slaves to fight in exchange for their sons. So if you didn't want your sons to fight,
wow,
you would send your slaves in
place
of your sons. And that could be how my grandfathers ended up in the Civil War fighting for Abraham Lincoln. Because remember, Maryland was allowed to keep their slaves. Delaware was allowed to keep their slaves. Kentucky was allowed to keep their slaves. And Missouri was allowed to keep their slaves. A lot of black people forget that the Emancipation Proclamation does not apply to enslaved Africans in Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, or Missouri. In fact, Queen Mother Harriet Tubman, whose birthday we just memorialized on January the 29th, by most accounts, that was probably the day she entered the world, January the 29th of 1820. Harriet was invited to an Emancipation Proclamation celebration. I think it was by Susan B. Anthony or Lucretia Mott, one of those white racists, but they invited her to the Emancipation Proclamation, and Harriet Tubman responded to that request with a denial, and she basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, she's saying, my family is from Maryland. They are still slaves.
Wow.
What do I have to celebrate?
Yeah. The same as we do on the 4th of July. What do we have to celebrate on the 4th of July?
About the 4th of July, Bob and David, as you know, next year, not this year, but next year, July 4th, 2026, the United States of America will be celebrating her 250th solar return. Also, on February the 7th of 2026, we will be celebrating the centennial, 100 years of Black History Month, founded by the late, great Dr. Carter G. Woodson. So I'm challenging every American African to make a decision. Are you going to celebrate 250 years of oppression with your slave master, or are you going to celebrate 100 years of the formal study of Black history and research?
Wow. That's if we still have recognition of Black History Month in 2026.
We don't need it.
That is true. We don't need it. It's for them anyhow.
Not start Negro History Week so white people could celebrate. Negro History Week was for us. It was not for them.
Right.
So I don't care about Donald Trump not recognizing Black History Month on a federal level.
That's right.
As far as I'm concerned, and we discussed this before, but as far as I'm concerned, whenever the federal government claims or consecrates a Black holiday, they weaken it, just like with Juneteenth. So him giving us back Black History Month to the Black community, he can give us back Juneteenth, he can give us back Dr. King holiday. I don't need my oppressor to celebrate my ancestors.
That's right. They ain't celebrating it here. They selling it.
Absolutely. It's all about money.
All about the Benjamins. So
and the good news, since he's not going to fund Juneteenth, we know Donald Trump is not going to fund Juneteenth, which in my opinion is a good thing. Why? Because for the past 3 years that Juneteenth has been federalized, Juneteenth has gotten weak. They have allowed the rainbow gangers to come and dominate it, integrated it. They've had immigrants all involved in it. Juneteenth is about the celebration of the emancipation of the American Africans. It is not about the celebration of rainbow culture, immigrants, and all this other stuff. So now that the federal money will be snatched out of Juneteenth, we can go back to celebrating Juneteenth the way it's supposed to be.
That's interesting. Now, last week we had Obona Hagen. I don't know if you know Obona here in Philadelphia, South Philadelphia. He said a magazine. He was talking about a Freedmen's Association. How does that tie into slavery and what America owes the black man?
I'm not sure, because there's all kinds. Of course, we know that there was the Freedmen's Bank and the Freedmen's Bureau and all of that, after slavery, that was largely done away with the passing of the 14th and 15th Amendments. But I don't know, because there's a lot of groups out there right now that claim to be the freedmen's organizations. And by freedmen, they're referring to Africans who are the offspring of the enslaved, So there's a lot of different American African groups. Of course, they don't claim their African identity at all. Most of them, they would rather identify with America, which is my biggest criticism of all of them. None of them have the word African in their name. None of them. American descendants of slaves, foundational black Americans, freedmen, they want nothing to do with their African identity. And as you know, as a Garveyite Pan-Africanist, identity is key. If you don't identify with me, how can I trust you? So since they don't identify as African, I can't trust them. Most of them seem to be in love with the slave master, while they demonize and criminalize all of our African immigrant brothers and sisters to come to the country. As I always say, there are Afropeans, there are Negropeans, there are Americans, there are Africans. There's bad in every group. Find the ones who have the right minds and let's organize with them. Stop wasting time demonizing other Africans, because I see too much negativity directed at Africans from American Africans, and I see too much being directed at American Africans from African immigrants, and none of us have that same level of vitriol for the white power structure. We will destroy each other and won't say nothing to the people responsible for the condition black America is in or the condition black Africa is in.
Well, when you talked about how many generations we are away from the original slave trade, I often tell people, because they say, well, I ain't no African. I said, well, how many generations do you have to be removed before you are no longer an African?
And you never see that with other groups, Baba David. You will never see a Chinese say, I'm no longer Chinese. You got Chinese who never been to China. They've never been to the mainland. They were born here. They never say, I'm not Chinese, I'm only American. You never hear it. You never hear an Arab say, I'm not from Saudi, or I'm not from Kuwait, I'm not from Pakistan. You never hear an East Indian say, I'm not from India. The only people who cut off their ancestry after being in America for a certain number of generations are American Africans, because we hate ourselves. In addition to that, Baba David, you never hear Chinese say, I'm Chinese descendant, or I'm a Chinese descendant. You don't hear them say, I'm Arab descendant, or I'm Arab descendant. No, they say, I'm Chinese.
I say that.
Arab.
I say that all the time.
I'm Mexican. But with black people, we will say Afro descendant, African descendant, because we're still trying to separate ourselves from the continent. Even the most African-centered of us, will go out of the way to make sure a distinction is drawn between being American and being African. We go out of our way because we're more proud of having been a slave to the white man than of having been descended from an African.
Wow, that's because people don't understand. When I tell them, I say, well, I'm an African born in America. And they can say, well, why? How you gonna say that? I say, because I don't care how many generations removed, I'm still an African.
And guess what, Baba David? The white man don't care either. He don't care how many generations you've been removed from Africa. He still know you African.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
No, the only people who are fooled as to who they are the self-hating Negroes of the United States.
But why is that? I mean, you're a psychologist. Why?
Because we have been psychologically dominated. We have been psychologically conquered, but we don't want to admit it. We don't want to admit to the world that we do not believe we can overcome racism. We don't want to admit to the world that we actually do believe that Caucasians are greater than African people. That's why we do not fight. We don't even get in the ring. It's like a boxer. They say, hey, you want to fight Mike Tyson? You want to fight Floyd Mayweather? No, I'm just going to sit this one out. I don't even think I can hang one round. Yeah. That's black America with the white power structure. We don't even think we can hang one round. And I'm looking at all these black people crying over the DEI cuts. First of all, Barack Obama is the one who rebirthed affirmative action as DEI. Because as you know, affirmative action got hit very hard with the quota request and things like that. And affirmative action pretty much died under the late presidency of Bill Clinton. And definitely its last years was under President George W. Bush. He basically completely gutted affirmative action. It was still on paper, but it was no longer in practice. So when Barack Obama became president after Bush, he needed to revive affirmative action in order to protect immigrants, white women, and the LGBTQs. He didn't want to use affirmative action language because it was too unpopular, and that would have marginalized the conservative Democrats from his base. So what he decided to do was come up with a new word: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Replaced affirmative action, with the big difference being DEI is for immigrants, homosexuals, and white women. It's not for black people. So when I see all these black people crying about Donald Trump cutting DEI, we were only 4% of DEI hires. We were only 4% of DEI hires. DEI did not significantly benefit the American African people. And then on the flip side of that, Bob and David, I'm looking at black women, this $30 billion on weave and beauty products. $30 billion on weave and beauty. There's no DEI in the Korean shops that you shop from. There's no DEI in these Chinese shops that you shop from. They don't even have black people working in there, and if they do, they're never around the counter. So help me understand how you got a problem with the federal government cutting out DEI, but you spend billions of dollars on useless garbage trying to make yourself look more like a white woman in businesses that have no DEI. Those Koreans who make that weave and that perm and that extensions and them braids and them wigs, they have no DEI policy. There's no Africans making any of that money. You don't complain about that. We have to do something about this selective morality that we have. I'm tired of it, where black people will get mad at it over here and won't say nothing about it over here. And black men, it's the same thing. Why are you crying about DEI when you got all these non-black women you're married to, having babies with, living off of you? There's no DEI in your household, because if you try to leave that white woman, she's going to take you for every penny that you got. So you're crying about Donald Trump cuts. Why don't you cry about your own behavior? Our biggest issue, Bob and David, is we don't want to take accountability for the role we play in our own oppression.
That is so true. We do so much harm and damage to ourselves every day. Instead of, even you go to the nail shops, you won't see no black nailers in there. You know,
right.
I mean,
you hear no complaint.
And
no
they
demand by black people to put more black people. We want to see black people in these nail shops. We want to see black people in these beauty salons. We want y'all to sell products. Look at how the Koreans don't even like to sell. They don't give bulk discount to most black hair shops. You can't get them product. No, they don't give them no deal.
No wholesale.
So why don't you fight for that? Where's the diversity, equity, and inclusion struggle against the Asians that you're giving so much of our money to? They're talking about Donald Trump is going to cut the United States Department of Education out. Well, guess what? How did the United States Department of Education benefit black children? It didn't systemically. Did a few people get some tokens? Yes. But tokenism is not systemic progress. That's what I need people to understand. Tokenism means a couple people will get something out of this. Most will not. A couple NFL players will retire rich. Most of them won't. A couple NBA players will retire rich. Most of them won't. You cannot substitute tokenism for the general improvement in the quality of life for all African people. Listen, the U.S. Department of Education, Bob and David, has only been a blessing to the departments of education because of the money. Because the Constitution does not give your child a right to learn, the feds are only involved in education to the extent that you uphold the 14th Amendment, and what you do, make sure it's equal for all kids, number one, and number two, the funding. They pay you to do what they want you to do because they really have no legal imperative to dictate to the public schools. So they give you money for special ed. They give you money for JROTC. They give you money for the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act. So can you make the argument that some black kids are going to struggle when those dollars get cut? Sure, you can make the argument, but I'm going to make a counter argument. The JROTC, I don't want black kids going to fight wars for America. I don't care about that. Special ed has been nothing but a financial hustle. Our kids going to special ed, they end up in prison. So I don't care if he cuts special ed. And let's go to the third one, the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, the Title I money. Most of that Title I money never goes to our children. It goes into these teachers. They pay them overtime and extra time to beef up their paychecks to improve reading and math for our kids, but our children never get the reading and math help that they are entitled to. So I don't care about the cuts. Take your money and open up your own schools for your children. Stop depending on the white man to save you. That's our problem.
Yes, it is. And you know what? I was talking to a white guy the other day, and I was telling him, he was a school teacher in West Philadelphia, and I was telling him, I said, you know what I would like to see? I would like to see a regular assembly in the classes about diversity and inclusion. I say they had these assemblies on a regular basis, then a lot of the white students wouldn't harbor so much hate because they would have a better understanding of inclusion and diversity. And he was more focused on, yeah, but I like the testing. But listen, we got to take a break. And we'll come back. If you have any comments about that diversity in the school system, and if you think that assemblies would help with the amount of hatred that's being perpetrated in the schools. We'll be right back with Dr. Umar Johnson. Patrick and Jadu is on the Zoom link as well. I thought that Dr. Johnson wanted to be on the Zoom. I wanted to show him I have my Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey t-shirt on that day.